The prison planet. The air on Varl was thick with the smell of despair. The prison planet, a barren wasteland of jagged rocks and poisonous winds, was home to the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, or those unlucky enough to be sent there. Zara stumbled through the dim corridors of the facility, her every sense on high alert. She had been here for months, though it felt like years, and survival meant staying invisible. Zara wasn't like the others. Most prisoners were brutal, seasoned fighters who had spent their lives in conflict. Zara was different. She was quiet, clever, and always thinking 2 steps ahead. She had no choice. She wasn't guilty of the crime that had brought her here. Framed for treason by someone she trusted, she now faced a lifetime of punishment for something she didn't do. The guards, towering alien brutes in heavy armor, patrolled the halls with cruel efficiency. They didn't need an excuse to attack. One wrong look or a slow response to their commands could mean days in isolation, or worse. Zara had learned to keep her head down, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But today, something was different. A sudden commotion echoed through the prison. Zara froze, her sharp green eyes scanning the hallway. The distant roar of a crowd rose from the direction of the landing bay. New prisoners had arrived. That usually meant trouble. The newcomers would try to establish dominance, and fights often broke out. Zara considered staying hidden in her cell, but curiosity pulled her toward the noise. She slipped into the shadows, navigating the labyrinth of corridors until she reached the central courtyard. The area was packed with inmates, a mix of species from across the galaxy. All eyes were on a single figure being escorted by the guards. He was human, a rarity in Varl. Zara had heard stories about humans. They were considered weak compared to many alien species, their small stature and lack of natural weapons making them easy targets. But this human was different. He stood tall, his gaze steady as the guards shoved him forward. His face was bruised, and his clothes were torn, but there was a fire in his eyes that made even the most hardened prisoners hesitate. "Fresh meat," one of the larger inmates growled, stepping forward. He was a massive, scaled alien with 4 arms and a reputation for breaking bones. "Let's see if humans scream like the rest." The crowd roared with anticipation, but the human didn't flinch. He locked eyes with the alien and spoke, his voice calm but commanding. "If you want to fight, I'll give you one. But you should know, I don't lose." Zara's breath caught. No one talked like that on Varl. Confidence was a dangerous thing here. It could get you killed. She watched as the alien lunged, his fists swinging with brutal force. The human moved like lightning, dodging the attack and striking back with precision. His punches were quick, calculated, and devastating. Within moments, the larger inmate was on the ground, unconscious. The crowd fell silent. Zara felt a shiver run down her spine. The human wasn't just strong, he was smart. He hadn't wasted energy on unnecessary moves. Every action was deliberate, efficient. He wasn't here to survive. He was here to win. The guards broke up the scene, dragging the defeated alien away. The human stood tall, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. He glanced around the crowd, his piercing eyes scanning the faces. When his gaze landed on Zara, she felt an unexpected jolt of fear. And something else. Curiosity. Who was this human? What was he doing on Varl? She needed answers, but approaching him was risky. If he was anything like the other prisoners, he wouldn't hesitate to use her to his advantage. Still, something about him felt different. He didn't seem like the others. He carried himself like a soldier, someone used to fighting for a cause. Zara slipped back into the shadows, retreating to her cell. Her heart was racing. The human had survived his first test, but the real challenges were yet to come. Varl didn't let anyone rest for long. She would keep an eye on him, but from a distance, for now. As she lay on the hard, cold surface of her cot, Zara couldn't shake the image of the human standing tall against his opponent. Something told her that his arrival would change everything. She didn't know whether it would be for better or worse, but one thing was certain: Kvarl was no longer the same. And neither was she. A dangerous alliance. The hum of Kvarl's artificial lights buzzed in Zora's ears as she watched the human from the shadows. His name, she overheard, was Captain Daniel Blake, a soldier from the Galactic Coalition. He didn't belong here, just like her. But unlike her, he seemed determined to carve out a place for himself in the chaos. Zora's instincts told her to stay away. But Kvarl wasn't a place for loners. Survival often meant forming alliances, even with someone as unpredictable as a human. Still, she hesitated. She had seen what happened to people who trusted the wrong person. The next morning, Zora's chance came. In the mess hall, Daniel sat alone at a corner table, eating the tasteless gray mush that passed for food. His body language was calm, but his eyes constantly scanned the room. He was already adapting, learning the rules of Kvarl. Zora approached cautiously, her steps silent on the worn metal floor. She slid into the seat across from him without a word. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel glanced up, his expression unreadable. "You're brave," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Sitting with me makes you a target." Zora smirked, keeping her voice equally quiet. "I'm already a target. Doesn't matter where I sit." Daniel studied her for a moment before nodding. "Fair enough. What do you want?" "An alliance," Zora said bluntly. "I've seen you fight. You're smart. You don't belong here, and neither do I." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "What's your angle? Why me?" Zora leaned in, lowering her voice. "Because you've already made enemies. That fight yesterday, it wasn't just about dominance. You embarrassed someone important. They'll come for you. You'll need someone to watch your back." Daniel considered her words, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. Finally, he said, "And what do you get out of this?" "Protection," Zora admitted. "I'm not a fighter. I survive by staying invisible, but that only works for so long. People like me, sooner or later, they get noticed." Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. "You're honest. I'll give you that. But alliances here are dangerous. Trust the wrong person, and you're dead." Zora met his gaze. "I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for a deal. We work together, watch each other's backs. When the time comes, we get out of here." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Escape. No one escapes Kvarl." "Not yet," Zora said, her voice firm. "But I've been listening. There's a rebellion brewing. They're planning something big. If we play it right, we might find a way out." Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then, to Zora's surprise, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was sharp, calculating, and dangerous. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. All right, Zora. You've got yourself a deal. But let's get one thing straight. I don't take orders. We do this my way." Zora nodded, feeling a mix of relief and unease. She had made her move, but Daniel was a wild card. His confidence was both an asset and a risk. Still, it was better than being alone. The alliance was put to the test sooner than expected. Later that day, the guards announced a mandatory work shift for all inmates. Work shifts were notorious on Kvarl. Prisoners were forced to mine rare minerals deep beneath the surface, a task made deadly by unstable tunnels and frequent cave-ins. Zora and Daniel were assigned to the same group. The guards herded them into a rickety elevator that creaked ominously as it descended into the depths. The air grew thick and oppressive, and the faint glow of bioluminescent moss barely lit the way. The task was simple: dig until the guard said stop. But simple didn't mean safe. As Zora worked, her hands blistering from the crude tools, she noticed the way the guards watched Daniel. They weren't just supervising. They were waiting, anticipating something. "Trouble's coming," Zora muttered under her breath, standing close to Daniel. "They're watching you." "I know," Daniel replied, his voice low. "Let them make the first move." It didn't take long. One of the guards barked an order, and 2 inmates dropped their tools, advancing on Daniel. They were massive, their muscles honed from years of hard labor. One was the brother of the inmate Daniel had defeated in the courtyard. Revenge was written all over his face. Daniel moved before they could strike. Using his shovel as a weapon, he deflected their blows with a speed that left Zara stunned. But the tight space worked against him. As Daniel fought, Zara saw another inmate sneaking up behind him, a jagged piece of metal in hand. For a split second, Zara hesitated. Then instinct took over. She grabbed a loose rock and hurled it with all her strength. The rock struck the attacker's head, knocking him off balance. Daniel turned, taking advantage of the distraction to disarm him. The fight ended as quickly as it began. The guards intervened, dragging the injured inmates away. Daniel was left standing, breathing hard but unharmed. He glanced at Zora, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," Zora replied. "We're in this together, remember." Daniel gave a small nod. "All right then. Let's see where this goes." As they returned to the surface, Zara felt the weight of their alliance settle over her. She had taken a risk, and now her fate was tied to Daniel's. Whether it was the right choice remained to be seen, but one thing was clear: on Kvarl, survival was never guaranteed. But together, they just might have a chance. The warden's secret. The whispers began to circulate as soon as Zara and Daniel returned to the prison barracks. The fight in the mines had not gone unnoticed. In a place like Kvarl, every act of defiance, every display of strength, rippled through the ranks like an electric current. Zara could feel the change in the air. People were watching them now, murmuring about the human who had taken down 2 seasoned fighters and the quiet woman who had backed him up. For Zara, attention was the last thing she wanted. But for Daniel, it was part of the plan. "Let them talk," he said as they huddled in the shadowy corner of the barracks that night. "We need them to see us as a threat." Zora frowned. "You want to paint a target on our backs." "Not a target," Daniel replied. "A reputation. If we're going to survive here, we need allies. People follow strength. They won't respect us if we hide." Zara didn't entirely agree, but she couldn't argue with the results. Daniel's strategy was working. By the next morning, a small group of inmates had approached them, offering information in exchange for protection. One of them, a wiry alien named Dren with a knack for overhearing conversations, came to them with something unexpected. "They're testing something down in the lower levels," Dren whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Something big. I heard the guards talking about it. They're calling it the Purge." Daniel and Zara exchanged a glance. "What kind of test?" Daniel asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Dren admitted, "but it's not just a weapon. It's alive. They said it feeds on energy, and it's tied to the planet somehow." Zara's stomach twisted. She had heard rumors of experiments happening in the depths of Kvarl, but this was different. A living weapon. What could that even mean? "We need more information," Daniel said, his voice steady. "Where are they keeping it?" Dren hesitated, fear flashing across his face. "The restricted zones. You'll never get in. The warden's got the whole place locked down." Daniel smirked. "We'll see about that." Later that night, Zara and Daniel put their plan into action. The restricted zones were heavily guarded, but Zara had spent months mapping the facility in her mind. She knew the guards' patrol routes, the blind spots in the cameras, and the weak points in the security systems. With Daniel's combat skills and Zora's knowledge of the prison, they made a formidable team. Slipping through the shadows, they avoided detection as they made their way toward the lower levels. Zara's heart pounded with every step, the weight of their mission pressing down on her. If they were caught, the punishment would be severe. But she couldn't ignore the growing sense that this was bigger than them, bigger than Kvarl. When they finally reached the restricted zone, Zora's breath caught. The area was unlike anything she had seen before. The corridors were lined with smooth, gleaming metal, a stark contrast to the rusted, crumbling walls of the rest of the prison. Strange machines hummed softly, their blinking lights casting eerie shadows. Daniel motioned for her to stay quiet as they moved deeper into the facility. The air grew colder, and Zara felt a strange vibration beneath her feet, as if the planet itself was alive. They passed rows of cells filled with strange, writhing creatures, test subjects, Zara realized with a shudder. Finally, they reached a large, heavily secured door. Zara crouched down, examining the keypad. "This is advanced," she whispered. "It's going to take time." Daniel nodded, keeping watch as Zara worked. Her fingers flew over the controls, her mind racing. She had always been good with technology, but this was beyond anything she had ever encountered. Whoever had designed this system wasn't just trying to keep people out. They were trying to hide something. After what felt like an eternity, the door hissed open. Zara and Daniel slipped inside, and what they saw made Zora's blood run cold. The room was massive, its walls lined with glowing tubes filled with pulsating energy. In the center of the chamber was a towering machine, its sleek, black surface thrumming with power. Suspended within it was a swirling mass of light and shadow, shifting and writhing as if alive. "What is that?" Zara whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel's jaw tightened. A weapon. The kind of weapon that could wipe out entire fleets. Zara's eyes widened as she realized the implications. It's feeding off the planet's core. That's why the ground feels unstable. They're draining Cave Varl to power it. Before Daniel could respond, an alarm blared, shattering the silence. Zara's heart leaped into her throat as the room was flooded with red light. They had been discovered. "Move," Daniel barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the exit. Guards poured into the chamber, their weapons raised. Daniel fought them off with brutal efficiency, using his fists and whatever tools he could find. Zara scrambled to keep up, her mind racing. They had seen too much. The warden would stop at nothing to silence them. As they ran through the corridors, Zara couldn't shake the image of the weapon from her mind. It wasn't just a threat to the prisoners. It was a threat to the entire galaxy. And they were the only ones who knew the truth. By the time they made it back to their quarters, both of them were battered and exhausted. Zara sank onto the cold metal floor, her chest heaving. "What now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel's eyes burned with determination. "We find a way to stop it, and we make sure everyone knows what's happening here." For the first time, Zara felt a flicker of hope. They were up against impossible odds, but they weren't alone. Together, they might just have a chance to change everything. The rebel leader. The prison was never quiet, but that night, Cave Varl seemed to hum with a strange energy. Zara and Daniel's discovery weighed heavily on their minds. The weapon they had seen wasn't just a tool of destruction. It was a statement of power, a reminder that the warden held all the cards. But for Daniel, it wasn't a reason to stop. It was fuel for the fight. They spent the following days listening, watching, and piecing together fragments of information from other prisoners. Whispers of rebellion were growing louder. It wasn't the first time prisoners had attempted to overthrow the guards, but this time felt different. There was a leader, someone who had been planning in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. "We need to find them," Daniel said one night as they sat in their dimly lit corner of the barracks. "Whoever's behind this rebellion might have the resources we need to take down that weapon." Zara frowned, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Or they'll get us killed. The warden's been setting traps for rebels for years. If we make the wrong move, we're done." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Then we don't make the wrong move. We find out who they are, what they want, and if they're worth the risk." Their search led them to a section of the prison Zara had avoided for months. The lower barracks, a dark, lawless part of Cave Varl, controlled by the most dangerous inmates. It was said that even the guards feared to enter without heavy reinforcements. But it was also where the rebellion's whispers were the loudest. The air grew colder as they descended, the faint hum of machinery replaced by the low murmur of voices and the occasional clang of metal. Zara's nerves were on edge, every shadow a potential threat. Daniel, as always, moved with quiet confidence, his sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. They finally reached a makeshift gathering space, a large open area where prisoners huddled in groups, whispering and exchanging stolen goods. At the far end of the room stood a figure who commanded attention without saying a word. He was tall and broad, his skin a deep shade of blue that seemed to shimmer under the dim lights. His eyes glowed faintly, a sign of his alien heritage, and a jagged scar ran down the left side of his face. He wore no uniform, only tattered clothing that somehow made him look more imposing. "That's Kale," Zara whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's the one." Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "Let's talk." As they approached, two guards, prisoners who acted as Cal's enforcers, blocked their path. "State your business," one of them growled, his sharp teeth glinting. Daniel didn't hesitate. "We're here to help." The guards exchanged a glance before stepping aside. Cale turned to face them, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Help," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "From a human. That's a first." Daniel didn't flinch. "I know what you're planning. I know about the rebellion. And I know what the warden is hiding in the lower levels." Cal's expression didn't change, but Zara saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. "And what makes you think I care what you know?" "Because I've seen it," Daniel said. "The weapon. The experiments. The warden's not just running a prison. He's building an army." Cale studied Daniel for a long moment before gesturing for them to follow. He led them into a smaller, more secluded area, away from prying eyes. Zara's heart raced as she glanced around, half expecting an ambush. Cale turned to face them, his towering presence making the small space feel even smaller. "If you've seen what's down there, you know it's suicide to go against the warden. He's got the guards, the weapons, the control. What do you think you can do?" "We don't have to fight him head-on," Daniel said. "We just have to hit him where it hurts. The weapon is powered by the planet's core. If we can sabotage it, we can take away his advantage." Cale laughed, a deep, humorless sound. "You think it's that simple? Do you have any idea how many people have died trying to escape this place? The warden always knows. He's always one step ahead." "That's because people like you are too afraid to try," Daniel shot back. "You've been sitting here, waiting for the perfect moment. Newsflash, it's never coming. The only chance we have is to act now." The room fell silent. Zara held her breath, half expecting Cale to strike Daniel down for his boldness. But instead, Cale smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. "You've got fire, human. I like that," he said. "But fire alone won't win this fight. You want my help. Prove yourself." "How?" Daniel asked. Cale's smile widened. "There's a shipment of weapons coming in tomorrow. The warden thinks it's secure. I want you to steal it. Bring it back here, and maybe I'll consider working with you." That night, Zara paced their barracks, her mind racing. "This is insane," she said. "The warden's shipments are guarded by dozens of heavily armed guards. Even you can't take them all on." "We don't have to," Daniel said, sitting calmly on the edge of his bunk. "We just have to be smarter than them. And I've got a plan." Zara stopped, her heart pounding. She had spent her entire time on Kvarl avoiding risk, staying in the shadows. But now she was part of something bigger, something dangerous. She didn't know if she could trust Cale or even Daniel, but she did know one thing. If they didn't try, they were already dead. "All right," she said finally. "What's the plan?" "The battle for freedom." The tension in the air was palpable as Zara and Daniel prepared for the heist. The prison's routines had become predictable to Zara over the months. Guards patrolled the outer rings of the facility, while shipments arrived at the docking bay in precise intervals. It was the one area where security was at its peak, and for good reason. Smuggling weapons or technology through the shipment lines was punishable by immediate execution. Cal's challenge wasn't just about proving loyalty. It was a death sentence for anyone reckless enough to try. The plan. Daniel spread a crude map of the prison's docking bay across the cold metal floor of their barracks. Zara crouched beside him, her mind racing as he explained the plan. "The guards are focused on the main entrance," Daniel said, tracing a finger over the map. "But the ventilation system here is big enough for us to squeeze through. It leads directly to the storage area where the weapons are offloaded." Zora frowned. "And then what? We just walk out carrying a pile of weapons. That'll attract attention." Daniel smirked. "No, we create a distraction." He gestured toward the fuel cells stored near the dock. "We sabotage one of these. The explosion will draw the guards away long enough for us to grab what we need and escape." Zora's stomach churned at the thought of crawling through the vents and setting off explosions, but she knew there was no other way. If they failed, Cal would abandon them, and their slim chance of escaping Keyvarl would vanish. The heist. The docking bay was eerily quiet when Zara and Daniel slipped into the shadows. The hum of machinery and the faint hiss of the ventilation system filled the air. Zara's pulse raced as she climbed into the narrow vent, Daniel close behind. The metal was cold against her skin, and every creak made her flinch. "Keep moving," Daniel whispered, his voice steady. "We're almost there." They emerged in the storage area, a vast space filled with crates marked with the warden's insignia. Zara's eyes darted to the security cameras mounted on the walls. Daniel had timed the rotation of the cameras perfectly, giving them a narrow window to work. Zara knelt beside a crate, her nimble fingers prying it open with a small tool. Inside were sleek, alien weapons, energy rifles, plasma grenades, and other tools of destruction. She swallowed hard, knowing that just one of these could change the balance of power in the prison. "Got it," she whispered, handing a rifle to Daniel. "Now for the distraction." Daniel nodded, setting a small, makeshift device on one of the fuel cells near the entrance. Zara's breath hitched as he activated the timer. "We've got 60 seconds, he said, grabbing a handful of grenades and tucking them into his belt. "Move." They slipped back into the vent, the tight space amplifying the sound of their breathing. Zara counted the seconds in her head, her heart pounding louder with each tick. Then it happened. The explosion rocked the entire facility, a deafening boom that sent shockwaves through the vents. Zara felt the heat behind her as fire erupted in the storage area. Alarms blared, and the shouts of guards filled the air. "Now," Daniel barked, pushing Zara forward. They dropped out of the vent and sprinted through the chaos. Guards were rushing toward the fire, their focus on containing the blaze rather than on the escaping prisoners. Zora clutched the stolen weapons to her chest, her legs burning as she ran. Daniel stayed close, his eyes scanning for threats. They'd reached the lower barracks, slipping into Cal's hidden chamber just as the guards began locking down the prison. A fragile alliance. Cal was waiting for them, his glowing eyes narrowing as he took in the weapons they carried. His lips curled into a small, approving smile. "You actually did it," he said, his deep voice laced with surprise. "I didn't think you had it in you." "Don't thank us yet," Daniel said, tossing a rifle onto the table. "The guards will be on high alert now. Whatever you're planning, it needs to happen fast." Cal's smile faded, replaced by a grim expression. "You've proven yourselves, but this is just the beginning. The warden's power doesn't come from these weapons. It comes from the fear he's built over years. If we're going to take him down, we need more than guns. We need unity." Zara spoke up, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Then we give them a reason to fight. We show them that the warden can bleed." Cal's gaze shifted to her, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're smarter than you look," he said. "Fine, we'll strike where it hurts most, his control center. That's where he monitors everything. If we take it out, We cripple his ability to respond. Daniel nodded. Then we move tonight, before the guards can regroup. The rising tide. The stolen weapons were distributed among the rebels, a ragtag group of prisoners who had been waiting for a chance to fight back. Zara and Daniel stood at the center of it all, their unlikely alliance with Kale solidified by their success. Zara couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to do. For the first time, the prisoners of Varl had hope. But hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed if their plan failed. As they prepared to move, Daniel placed a hand on Zora's shoulder. "You did good back there," he said, his voice soft. "We wouldn't have made it without you." Zara managed a small smile. Let's just make sure it wasn't for nothing. Together, they joined the rebels, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that the battle for freedom was just beginning. The warden's control over Varl had been absolute for years, but now, for the first time, it was starting to crack. And Zara was determined to see it shatter. "You're thinking about backing out," he said. Zara shook her head. "No, just wondering if we're doing the right thing. What if this makes everything worse?" "It might," Daniel admitted. "But doing nothing is worse. We've seen what the warden's capable of. That weapon he's building, it's not just about control. It's a threat to the galaxy. If we don't stop him, no one will." Zora looked at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. She envied his confidence, his ability to face impossible odds without flinching. But then she realized something. He wasn't fearless. He was scared, just like her. The difference was that he refused to let fear control him. "I'm in," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's finish this." The assault begins. The rebels moved under the cover of darkness, slipping through the prison's labyrinthine corridors with practiced precision. Zara and Daniel led the charge, their intimate knowledge of the facility guiding the group through hidden passages and blind spots in the guards' patrols. As they neared the control center, the group split into two teams. Kale took the larger group to create a diversion, drawing the guards away from the main entrance. Zara, Daniel, and a handful of others were tasked with infiltrating the control room and disabling the systems. Explosions rocked the prison as Cal's team launched their attack. Alarms blared, and the guards scrambled to respond. Zara's heart pounded as she and her team slipped through the chaos, their movements quick and silent. Every step brought them closer to the control center and closer to danger. The control room. The entrance to the control center was heavily guarded, as they had expected. Daniel signaled for the group to hold position while he and Zara moved closer. The two of them crept along the shadows, their breaths shallow as they assessed the situation. "There are too many," Zara whispered. "We'll never get through without alerting them." Daniel smirked, pulling a small cylindrical device from his belt. "That's why we brought this." He activated the device and tossed it toward the guards. A moment later, a blinding flash of light and a deafening bang filled the air. The guards staggered, clutching their eyes and ears. Zara and Daniel moved quickly, taking them down before they could recover. Inside the control room, the walls were lined with monitors displaying every corner of the prison. At the center of the room was a massive console, its blinking lights and holographic displays a testament to the warden's technological dominance. Zara rushed to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "This is more advanced than I thought," she muttered. "It's going to take time." Daniel stood guard, his weapon at the ready. "Take all the time you need. Just get it done." As Zara worked, the door behind them burst open. Guards poured into the room, their weapons blazing. Daniel moved with deadly efficiency, his strikes precise and devastating. But the guards kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. Zara's hands shook as she worked, sweat dripping down her face. "I need a few more minutes," she shouted. "We don't have a few more minutes," Daniel yelled back, slamming the door shut and barricading it with a nearby console. "Zara, listen to me. If this doesn't work, you need to run. Don't look back." Zara froze, her mind racing. "I'm not leaving you," she said. Daniel turned to her, his expression hard but his eyes soft. You have to. If this place goes down, you're the one who needs to get out. You're the one who can tell the galaxy what happened here. The sacrifice. The guards broke through the barricade, and Daniel charged forward, buying Zora precious seconds. He fought with everything he had, his movements a blur of strength and skill. But it wasn't enough. A shot caught him in the side, and he staggered. Zora screamed, her heart twisting as she saw him fall. But his voice cut through the chaos, steady and commanding. Zora, finish it. Now. Tears streamed down her face as she turned back to the console. Her fingers moved on instinct, her mind barely registering the commands she was entering. The system finally responded, and the prison's surveillance and defense systems shut down. Alarms blared as the control room's power flickered, signaling the success of their mission. Zara turned to see Daniel slumped against the wall, blood pooling beneath him. He managed a faint smile. You did it, he said, his voice weak. Now go. Zara hesitated, her heart breaking. I'm not leaving you. You have to, Daniel said, his voice firmer. Promise me. Zara's chest tightened, but she nodded. I promise. Escape. With the prison's systems down, chaos erupted. Prisoners poured into the hallways, overwhelming the guards. Zara joined the rebels, her heart heavy, as she fled the control center. Behind her, the sounds of battle faded into the distance. She didn't stop running until she was aboard a stolen transport ship, Kale at her side. The ship's engines roared to life, carrying them away from Kvarl and into the uncertain freedom of space. As the prison disappeared from view, Zora clutched a small blood-stained token Daniel had given her, a reminder of the man who had sacrificed everything for their freedom. We'll make it count, she whispered, her voice trembling. I promise. A warrior's legacy. The escape from Kvarl felt like a dream, a blur of chaos, fire, and deafening noise. As the stolen transport ship hurtled through space, Zara sat silently by a small viewport, her eyes fixed on the shrinking dot that was Kvarl. The prison planet was now in ruins, its defenses shattered, its systems offline. But the cost had been immense. Daniel was gone. The weight of his absence pressed on her chest, threatening to crush her. Every step, every breath she took now felt like a betrayal of the promise she had made to him. He had entrusted her with the truth, with the fight, with the hope that she could do what he no longer could. And she wasn't going to fail him. The gathering storm. Cal's voice snapped Zora out of her thoughts. He stood in the middle of the ship's cramped bridge, surrounded by a mix of alien and human rebels, his glowing eyes scanning the group. His usual commanding tone was tempered with a rare softness as he addressed the survivors. We've won a battle, Cal said, his deep voice resonating in the confined space. But the war is far from over. The warden may be dead, but Kvarl was just one piece of the machine. The people who built it, the ones funding it, they're still out there. The rebels murmured among themselves, their exhaustion palpable. Zara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Then we take the fight to them. All eyes turned to her. Zara had never been the type to lead, but something inside her had shifted. Daniel's sacrifice had ignited a fire she couldn't ignore. We've seen what they're capable of, she continued. The experiments, the weapon they were building. It's not just about control. They're preparing for war. Against who or what, we don't know. But we do know they won't stop unless we make them. Cale nodded, a flicker of approval in his glowing eyes. You've got a plan. Zara hesitated, the enormity of the task ahead dawning on her. But then she remembered Daniel's words. You're the one who can tell the galaxy what happened here. Yes, she said, her voice firm. We start by exposing the truth. Kvarl wasn't just a prison. It was a testing ground. We need to show the galaxy what they were doing there, and we need to find out who's behind it. The message. The rebels set course for a remote outpost on the fringes of the galaxy. a place where Kel had contacts who could help them broadcast a message. The journey was tense, the ship filled with a mix of hope and doubt. Zara spent the days poring over the data she had downloaded from the control center, uncovering the extent of the warden's experiments. The files revealed horrifying details. Thousands of prisoners had been used as test subjects for the energy-based weapon. The weapon wasn't just powered by Kvarl's core. It was designed to drain the life force of entire planets. It was a doomsday device, and Kvarl was merely the prototype. When the ship finally reached the outpost, Zara and Kale wasted no time. The outpost was a hub of smugglers, hackers, and fugitives, a place where secrets could be bought and sold. Kale's contact, a grizzled old alien named Vren, agreed to help them broadcast their message across the galaxy. The transmission was simple but powerful. Zara stood in front of the camera, her face pale but determined. "My name is Zara," she began, her voice steady. "I was a prisoner on Kvarl. But Kvarl wasn't just a prison. It was a place of torture, experimentation, and death. The warden and his masters were building a weapon, one that could destroy entire planets. They thought no one would ever know. But now, the galaxy will." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "We need help. We can't fight this alone. If you believe in justice, if you believe in freedom, join us. Stand with us against the people who think they can play gods. Together, we can stop them." The message ended, and Vren sent it out to every corner of the galaxy. Now, all they could do was wait. The first response. The response was overwhelming. Within days, messages began flooding in from across the galaxy. Some were offers of help, smugglers, ex-soldiers, and even a few rogue planetary leaders pledged their support. Others were cries for justice from families of prisoners who had disappeared into Kvarl, never to be seen again. But not all the responses were friendly. A shadowy figure appeared in one of the intercepted transmissions, a representative of the organization behind Kvarl. Their voice was cold, their words dripping with menace. "You think you've won, little rebels," they said. "But you've only made yourselves targets. We're coming for you. And when we find you, we'll make sure no one remembers your names." The threat sent a chill through the rebels, but Zara refused to back down. "Let them come," she said. "We're ready." The legacy. Over the following weeks, the rebels grew into a movement. Ships arrived at their hidden base, bringing supplies, weapons, and people willing to fight. Zara became the heart of the resistance, her quiet strength inspiring others to believe in the cause. Kale stood by her side, his gruff demeanor softening as he came to respect her leadership. "You've changed," he said one day, watching as Zara coordinated a training session for new recruits. "You're not the same woman I met on Kvarl." "I can't afford to be," Zara replied. Daniel believed in something bigger than himself. "I can't let that belief die." As the movement grew, so did the threats against them. Skirmishes with enemy forces became more frequent, each victory hard-fought. But with every battle, Zara's resolve deepened. She carried Daniel's memory with her, a constant reminder of the sacrifice he had made. His name became a symbol for the rebellion, his story spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. People called him the human warrior, the man who had dared to defy impossible odds. The final promise. One night, as Zara stood on the bridge of their flagship, staring out into the endless void of space, she clutched the small blood-stained token Daniel had given her. She spoke softly, her voice carried only by the silence. "I don't know if you can hear me, Daniel," she said, "but I promise I'll make this count. I'll make sure they remember. Not just you, but everyone who fought, who sacrificed, who believed. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." The stars shimmered outside the viewport, a quiet reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the fight still ahead. Zara took a deep breath, her heart heavy but resolute. The warrior's legacy lived on, and Zara would make sure it burned brighter than ever.